Thanks everyone for coming today to the external workshop. My name's Adam Haxell. I'm the Strategic Relationships Lead at HCPC. I manage kind of our stakeholder relations, and I'm joined by some of my colleagues today who will introduce themselves for their section. So this is our consultation workshop. Come to some housekeeping. The session today is scheduled for an hour, and we'll keep this time as much as possible. We have a number of ways of engaging with us. We have the chat function is available, and we encourage people to obviously write comments and also introduce yourselves in the chat should you wish to. We also have some polling for some of the questions, and that'll be kind of throughout the session. And also Slido is available, and the link to that I'm sure will be shown very soon. And that's also for capturing other comments. And obviously everything that's put down in the session today will be captured by us and looked at afterward. Overview of today's session, we'll go over some of the current standards and what the HCPC does. We'll look at the proposed new standards as are in the consultation, and then we'll look at some of the post-consultation activities that we'll be looking to engage in. So the role of the HCPC, so who we are and who we regulate. So we are a regulator of 15 different professions, and our essential purpose and the heart of our mission is to uphold the high standards in the professions we regulate in the aid of public protection. This includes quality assuring education, maintaining the register of professionals, setting appropriate standards, and responding to FTP fitness to practice concerns. And obviously it's the setting appropriate standards that we're looking at mainly today. And we also have a kind of an upstream regulation function where we look to do as much as possible to prevent issues arising and work with stakeholders to ensure that we are kind of having a kind of continual conversation about these things and not waiting for issues to arise where we have to then respond in, for example, fitness to practice. So we are hoping that sessions like this and our kind of wider engagement helps to build on kind of the learning function that is inherent in public protection. If we can go to the next slide, please. So we're looking today at our standards of conduct, performance and ethics. And these outline what our service users can expect. And there are 10 standards, and they go alongside, sorry, they are our standards of conduct, performance and ethics. We also have our standards of proficiency, and just to say we are also currently updating our standards of proficiency. For those unaware, the new standards of proficiency will be going live on the 1st of September of this year, and we also have a series of webinars and resources available on that. So aside from this, but this is obviously on of conduct, performance and ethics, and we also have our ones on continuing professional development. So the conduct, performance and ethics ones are 10 standards, which we'll go into in a second. The standards of proficiency set the threshold standards that are necessary to protect the public. Each profession has its own standard of proficiency, and they set clear expectations of the knowledge and abilities you should have at the start of the practice of your profession. As I say, they are being updated currently, so you can see our website for more details on that. And there's also a very good gap analysis tool for those unaware of the changes. And the CPD ones, obviously CPD is a way to keep your skills and knowledge up to date throughout your career. These set the standards for your ongoing learning and development, and there are lots of resources on our website to support you to meet CPD requirements, and we will be hopefully doing a campaign later this year also to help demystify the process further. But we're looking today at the conduct, performance and ethics standards. I won't read them all here, but you can see we have 10 standards for conduct, performance and ethics, which we're updating currently. They are not prescriptive, but instead provide a high-level framework within which you should practice. This is a good thing, we believe, as it gives you autonomy, flexibility to practice in the way you need to, and how you meet them and what is and is not appropriate depends on the circumstances of your individual practice and the context within which you are working. That's why we say that you need to use your professional judgment to assess what is safe and effective practice for you in the context with which you're working. I'm going to pass over to my colleague Rosemary second, who can take it in more detail, but just to say that the chat will be continually monitored. Myself and my colleague Maheshi will also be monitoring the chat, so any comments you put down, we'll be looking at and responding to. I'll pass over to Rosemary, who has the detail on the consultation. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam, and hello, everybody. I'm Rosemary Flowers-Wanjie. I'm a policy manager at the HCPC, and today I'll be talking to you about some of the changes that we've proposed to the standards of conduct, performance and ethics, specifically those relating to communication with colleagues, service users and carers. I'll also talk a little bit about our proposed changes to our guidance on social media as well, which is very important when we're thinking about communication these days. So our review to the Standards of Conduct, Performance and Ethics began in 2022. Many of the proposals that we have published are based on engagement from stakeholders during our pre-consultation workshops and also our online survey that took place in summer 2022. We launched the consultation at the end of March 2023, and it is still currently open and it will remain open for public response until the 16th of June this year. So responding to the consultation is an opportunity for you to give us your thoughts and about the proposed new standards, and for us to hear detailed feedback from all of our stakeholders on the proposed changes that we have published to the Standards of Conduct, Performance and Ethics, and also the guidance on social media that sits alongside it. Based on our pre-consultation engagement, we identified 5 areas of change to the Standards of Conduct, Performance and Ethics, which you can see on the slides here. So they are equality, diversity and inclusion, communication with colleagues, service users and carers, which is what we're talking about today, duty of candour, upskilling and training responsibilities, and managing existing health conditions and disabilities in the workplace. We've also discussed sustainability as a possible future area of change to the Standards of Conduct, Performance and Ethics. So in the consultation response, we do want to hear from you about your thoughts on sustainability. And we also, each of our consultation workshops is dedicated to exploring one of these 6 themes. Today, as I said, we're here to talk about communication. Before we do talk about the proposals in relation to communication, we do want to hear from you today. And so we have a Slido available here. You can follow the QR code, or you can also access Slido on the event page. So slido.com, and then put the event code in, which is communication. And also you can still use the Teams chat function as well if that's easier for you. And we'll refer to your contributions during today's session. And so also if you have any questions, you can put that in the chat. You can also put them in Slido if you like, or if you want to start a discussion, please do put your thoughts in Slido, and and we'll refer back to them. When you do put anything in Slido, your contributions are anonymous. When you share on the Teams chat, they are not anonymous, just to let you know. So the standards of conduct, performance and ethics are split into 10 standards, as we heard earlier on from Adam, and these break down into further detail. So on the slide here, you can see the main changes that we have made to our standards 2.1 to 2.5. These standards relate to how we expect HCPC registrants to communicate with service users and carers specifically. In Standard 2.4, we've proposed an added reference to taking all practicable steps to meet service users and carers' communication needs. We've also proposed in this section a new Standard 2.5, which requires registrants to communicate responsibly. In this standard, these standards here, you can see that we have proposed changes to standards 2.6 through to 2.9, which relate to working with colleagues. We've retained some of the current standards, so for example, to work in partnership with colleagues and to share information where appropriate for another health and care professional to provide care to a service user. The proposals in which we've expanded the standards include a requirement to show colleagues respect and consideration. This is in the new proposed standard 2.8. And then we've also got standard 2.9, in which our proposals are to require registrants to use all forms of communication responsibly. And we've put that very clearly there. It's quite similar to standard 2.5. This specifically refers to communicating with colleagues. So the next set of standards that we're looking at are the social media and networking standards that relate to social media and networking sites. So here we've proposed a new set of standards on social media and networking sites because we've moved the original standard here to be separated out into the other sections of standard 2. So the new standards here that we've proposed are a new standard on ensuring that information shared online is accurate and does not mislead the public. Lastly, we've also proposed a new standard 2.12 that requires registrants to maintain professional boundaries and to also protect service user and carer privacy on social media networks and media sharing sites. So I'll go through some of the reasons that we've made these changes. So many of the changes that we have made are based on stakeholder feedback in our pre-consultation period. For example, we were asked by participants to retain the simplicity of the standards and to be clear about the expectations that we have of registrants, specifically when using social media or media sharing sharing sites, but also more generally online as well. Our proposed edition of Standard 2.5, which you might remember I just talked about, requires registrants to use all forms of communication responsibly, and it's one of the ways in which we sought to add clarity to the standards. The standard makes it clear that registrants must use forms of communication, including but not limited to social media, so all forms of communication responsibly when communicating with service users. We really wanted to get across here that it's not about where you say something, it's about how you say it. So we've also proposed adding standard 2.8 to clearly state that registrants must treat colleagues in a professional manner. This also met a concern that participants had that the current standards do not directly ascertain a requirement to treat colleagues professionally. So it didn't specifically relate to colleagues. And similarly to standard 2.5, new standard 2.9, as I said earlier, it ascertains that clear requirement to use all forms of communication with colleagues specifically responsibly. Another area in which we sought to improve the clarity of the standards is our standards on social media through standard 10, 11 and 12 as well. Our standards on social media are also an area where we have updated the standards so that they're more relevant to the way in which social media is used in health and care settings. We heard from many workshop participants and survey respondents too that they wish to see more reference to the range of social media applications within the standards. Furthermore, we have directly tackled the spread of misinformation online by adding a registrant requirement to make reasonable checks to ensure the accuracy of the information that you're sharing online. A final reason for the changes that we've made is ensuring statutory alignment, that the standards align with other statutory requirements. So, for example, in Standard 2.4, we've changed the language to match registrants' existing statutory requirements to take all practicable steps to meet the communication needs of service users and carers. So, as mentioned earlier, it really is great to hear from you in relation to these proposals. And that really is what the consultation period is all about and what these workshops are all about. So I hope that while I've been talking to you, you've been busy on our Slido channel, sharing your views about communication in the standards of conduct, performance and ethics, and just in general about the standards more generally as well. On the slides here, you'll see some questions that will be available for you to answer in a poll that I'm just about to launch. So that should launch now. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. And the question is communication an area of concern for you? So again, I really want to stress here that there's no right answer to these questions, these polling questions. They're really just for us to sort of get a sense of how important this topic is to you. And what is important for us is that we hear your honest answers. So let's have a look. Great, lots of people answering, and we've got lots of people saying that communication is always an area of concern for you. I do apologise there. There's a little bit of a typo in the question. It says communicating. It should say communication, but hopefully you know what I mean. And yeah, we've got some people also saying that sometimes communication is an area of concern for them. And if any of you want to put your sort of expand upon your answers in the chat or on Slido, please do. That would be very helpful. So I'm just about to launch the second poll, and that is specifically asking, are the suggested changes to 2.1 to 2.12 clear? So this is specifically in reference to the changes that we've proposed to the standards of conduct, performance and ethics that focus on communicating with service users, carers, colleagues, and also relate to how we communicate on social media as well. So let's have a look and see what people are responding to. Oh, great. That's really awesome to see that we've got quite a few people responding at the moment, and we've got a high response of people saying that the suggested changes are clear. Some people saying, we've got 5% people saying that they're not clear, that they're barely clear, and some people saying in the middle, saying that they're somewhat clear as well. We don't have anybody saying that they're not at all clear yet, which is great to hear. And again, if you want to expand upon your answer, please do put that into the chat as well. I can see that someone in the chat has talked about the inclusion of students when we're talking about service users, carers and colleagues are mentioned. That's a very good question. We do have a document on our on students and how students should be, how we expect students to be operating in health and care settings. And obviously, again, when you are a student, if you're, for example, on placement, we would include that as a colleague. If you're a student who's going and using services, again, you're a service user. And then if you're also performing, as I say, if you're performing any duties as a student, as you're on placement, as a registrant, as a future registrant, we have separate guidance on that. It's in a different document, and I can share that with you a little later on if you like. So thank you for that question. That's really helpful. And thank you everybody for participating in our polls. Yeah, it's really, really helpful to hear your feedback. And also, please do remember to respond to our consultation as well. That is the main form in which we will be analysing responses to our proposals. So it's really important that we get responses from our registrants and also all of our other stakeholders as well. We really want to hear from you in detail about how you feel about the things that the changes that we've proposed to the standards of conduct, performance and ethics. And of course, it's not just the standards of conduct, performance and ethics that we've made proposed changes to. Alongside those changes, we've also revised our guidance on social media, as I mentioned a little bit earlier on. And so we've introduced further information to clarify how we expect all registrants to use social media in a way that honours all of our standards, including how a registrant communicates with others. So, for example, following our proposed updates to Standard 2.10, we've updated our guidance on social media to clearly state that when using social media, registrants must apply the standards in the same way as they would when they are communicating in other ways. So if you think about the way that you would communicate with a service user or a colleague face to face in a professional setting, you need to apply that to when you're communicating them with on social media as well. So on social media, you must communicate with them in a polite and a respectful way, just as you would on when you're face to face. And that's what we've made clear here in our revised guidance on social media. Similarly, we have further expanded upon what new Standard 2.11 looks like in practice in our proposed new guidance as well. So you can see the proposed new standard here on the screen, and then you can also see the wording in which we've added in this guidance on social media as well. So this standard deals with making reasonable checks on the accuracy of the information that you post online. As I mentioned earlier, it's all about tackling misinformation online, which is a problem that we know we heard from our participants in our pre-consultation workshops that it was quite a big concern. So in our proposed new guidance on social media, we've provided further details on how registrants can prevent misinformation in practice. So that includes checking where the information originates from and thinking about whether the origin of the information is a trustworthy source, and also thinking about how the messages that we put online interact with government public health messages as well. So in relation to Standard 2.12, we have updated our guidance on social media to guide registrants in ensuring that the information shared on social media does not reveal personal information about service users and or their carers as well. So the guidance now reiterates that registrants must use their professional judgment when deciding what to post on social media. So you might remember from earlier on in the session, Adam referring to the expectation that you use professional judgment. We do want to support our registrants in being autonomous professionals. And so that's what this guidance is all about. It's about giving you information so that you can make those decisions in the context that you're working in. And there's also an extra reminder here as well that to registrants that posts can be taken out of context. And that includes posts being made public when they're intended to be shared just privately. And so that's an important consideration that we think registrants should make when they are posting on social media. And that's what we've made clear here in the guidance. So thank you so much for listening to the proposed changes in our consultation. Before I hand over to my colleague Maheshi, I'll have a quick look at our Slido. And see if we've got any responses here. So, okay, this is an interesting question that somebody has posted that they would like to see something around the intention behind the communication, as someone may say something with the best of intentions but be misunderstood. And that's very understandable. And I think that what's important is thinking about our responsibility to make our communication clear. We can't, sometimes it is unavoidable. People do misunderstand what we're saying. And I think that where we are sure that the information that we've shared or the way in which we've communicated with someone is clear, that we've chosen our words carefully, I think that when we can make sure that the misunderstanding isn't coming from something that we've said, it's coming from something that that the way in which someone else is approaching us, because we recognise that there are two people involved in any interaction. So I think as long as you are, as long as you've made sure that you're familiar with the standards as they are, I think that, and you communicate in that way, you communicate in a way that you believe to be respectful and polite, for example, I would say that, yeah, you should be on the right track to meeting the standards. Yeah, and that's also really great as well. Someone in the Slido has also talked about checking in how it has landed as well. That's another way in which to make sure that your communication is coming across the way it's intended as well. So you can check in with the person that you're talking to. We've got a comment here about a specific standard 2.11. I think the last line about contradicting government public messages is slightly harsh. Is there a way that registrants can have a personal account where they can question and challenge society? As a democratic country, this does feel draconian, and a clear explanation for registrants on how they can express their own individual opinions, which may differ from their professional opinions, would be useful. And that is a really, really great comment. Honestly, when we're looking at updating our guidance on social media, we thought really carefully about the way in which we wrote it to ensure that we're protecting people's freedom of expression. And of course, you know, we all have a right to our freedom of expression, where we also want to make sure that the things that people are, we also want to make sure that that the things that people are saying are not harming the public, because that really is our central role as a regulator, is to ensure public protection. And so when we're talking about the messages that are posted on social media, it's specifically talking about messaging that has an impact on your professional practice, and on your profession as a whole. Um, and so it is important that we do check that the messaging that we do put on social media is accurate, and that it's true, that it's from a safe source. And where it's talking about contradicting government public messaging, there is a way in which you can challenge government public messaging in a personal way when you're talking about evidenced opinions, and it's not putting public safety in terms of your health and your profession at risk as well. So I'll just spend a couple more minutes here. We will come back to the Slido again before we wrap up, but I'll just spend a couple more minutes looking at the Slido. Okay, so we've got another comment here on standard 2.5, that this person thinks that 2.5 is quite strong. It's important to see colleague-to-colleague communication having its own separate section in standard 2. It seems responsive to what people have identified, and certainly that was literally our exact intention. It was to ensure that we heard from, we did hear from participants in our workshops and also in our survey that colleague to colleague communication can sometimes break down. It can lead to harassment, bullying, and just not very safe environments. And so we wanted to make sure that within our standards, there was that very clear expectation that as a registrant, it is your responsibility to help to create those safe environments by speaking to your colleagues in a way that's respectful and that's professional. It's not just service users that we should be doing that with, or carers even as well. It's also our colleagues. Is a definition of the word responsible included in the standards, or maybe some example? This person is thinking of the things registrants put on social media without thinking of the impact on service users or their organisation. So I think, so first of all, Whether there'll be a definition of the word responsible included in the standards, at the way in which we've proposed them now, there isn't a section on definitions. However, what we are looking to do, and my colleague Maheshi will go into this a little bit later, is to ensure that we're thinking about the explanatory materials that we release alongside our standards. And it is more than possible that the word responsible could be explored in those explanatory materials to make sure that it's clear what we mean by that word. But that will be influenced by the different processes that we're following to draft those explanatory materials. And like I said, my colleague Maheshi is going to come in on that in just a minute. In relation to thinking of the things that registrants put on social media without thinking of the impact, the changes that we've made here are really saying to registrants that you must think about the impact of service users or your organisation when you post on social media. You need to be thinking about what you're posting on social media in relation to your profession and to your service users. And that's what a lot of the changes to the standards, particularly on social media, are all about. So thinking about those, so thinking about misinformation and thinking about where the information is coming from. Without thinking about the impact that misinformation can have on service users, that can lead to quite a lot of harm on a service user if you don't think about that before you post on social media and you post something on social media that is inaccurate and that could lead to public harm. So it's important to think carefully about that before you post on social media. Okay, so I'm going to give the Slido a little bit of a rest now. I can see some good conversations happening, but we will come back to them, don't worry, and keep posting as well as we go on. So I'll now hand over to my colleague Maheshi, who will talk about our next steps in the review, and she will lead us to close the session.
Thank you, Rosemary, and hello, everyone. I'm Maheshi de Silva, Policy Officer at the HCPC. So, as Rosemary mentioned briefly earlier, we received feedback during our pre-consultation activities, so that whilst the standards are accessible, some stakeholders may benefit from more explanatory materials for the standards. So, we've therefore proposed the setting up of a pre-launch explanatory materials design group. Members of that group will read the final standards and provide advice on the explanatory materials that would be helpful for readers who are, for example, living with disabilities or neurodiversity, or where English is their second language. We will also set up a pre-launch reading group to further meet our commitments towards equality, diversity, and inclusion. And this group will be set up to ensure that we understand the potential impact of the new standards on people with protected characteristics. So the group will be made up of people from a variety of backgrounds, such as people of colour, people with disabilities, and international registrants. Members of the group will then read the final standards before their publication and provide us with valuable feedback. So once the consultation is finished and we have collated responses, we hope to launch the new standards in autumn 2023 to ensure that the new standards are fully disseminated and understood widely. We will have a year-long implementation period. So in this, we'll aim for the standards to come into effect in September 2024. And we also want to keep the conversation about standards of conduct, performance, and ethics going. So therefore, activities in the implementation period will include workshops with registrants and other stakeholders to learn more about what meeting the new standards will look like in practice. So this period will also be focused on ensuring that education providers, our internal teams, and registrants are ready for the standards to come into effect in September 2024. It will also allow our internal teams and education providers to integrate the new standards into their materials processes and curriculum effectively. So before we close today, as Rosemary mentioned, we'll just have one last look at the Slido and the chat session. Thank you everyone as well for contributing as we've been going on. Lots of interesting conversation that's happening here. I saw something earlier about the inclusion of the term students that's popped up in the chat, as well as Slido, and some interesting points about HCPC approving a CPD for social media too. So I'll pan over to Rosemary.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to highlight, Maheshi, the thinking about CPD and how we support registrants in putting these standards into practice, and that is exactly what our implementation period is intended for. So as Maheshi said, we have a year-long implementation period, and that allows us to host a number of different workshops and to also release our explanatory materials and to work on the design of those explanatory materials as well, so that when the standards come into effect in September 2024, registrants have all of those materials and those experiences and those conversations there to help them to know how to put the standards into practice in their individual contexts of work. And I think one thing I really would say is, so I can see as well, there's so much feedback going on in the Slido and also in the Teams chat on specific words that people want to see in the standards. And I must say to all of those people, please respond to our consultation and include those comments. It is important for us to hear these suggestions, and we will include all of the responses that we get in our analysis, and we will take on board the feedback that we receive. So if you do want to see specific words included and things like that, you can make that suggestion, and we can look at whether we can include that in the standards as well. The more people that we get requesting a particular word, the more likely that you'll see that in the standards as well, and if there's a good rationale for that as well. So I think in the, for example, in the pre-consultation workshops, we had quite a discussion on the word kindness. I know that other regulators use kindness in some of their standards, and there was, and it kept coming up. But every single time it came up, there was a deep discussion on whether kindness is sort of culturally neutral enough to be used in the standards, or whether actually it's got a lot of interpretation behind it. And so for that reason, we've stuck with those words responsible, polite, and things like that. That the feedback that we received from people during our pre-consultation feedback was that those might be helpful words to use in the standards when helping people to know how to communicate to service users, carers, and colleagues, and also students. So please do, especially in relation to the comment about including students in the standards. It would be very, very helpful to see that in our consultation responses, and to hear from you guys directly in that. So I'm going to just have a look at our Slido. So see, we've got someone in the Slido who's saying kindness is a woolly word. But yeah, all of these words can be thought of differently based on lived experiences, and that is true. But we do need to think, we do need to use some words. So we need to find words that are as culturally neutral as possible, and that have the intended effect when we're talking about communication and how we ought to communicate. Oh, and this is really helpful as well. We've got some links to some of the websites that will provide that can provide some background detail on the use of the word civility. So there's someone who's pointed us to civilitysaveslives.com. I'll be sure to take a look at that and think about that seriously. So yeah, thank you very much for that. And again, please do put that in our consultation response. That really is the primary way in which you can make sure that your viewpoint and your suggestions are heard by our team when we're analysing the responses and when we're drafting the final standards. So I've got another one here that is talking about some support is needed around communications with service users and colleagues from non-binary or trans backgrounds. We are currently working hard to educate colleagues on terminologies to make sure people feel confident when working with vulnerable groups. That's really great work to be doing, and it's really interesting to hear about that. And again, I would really appreciate seeing that detail in a consultation response, so we can include that in our analysis. And certainly that will be something that is something that, for example, our explanatory materials group could be thinking about in terms of the materials that we might need to help people to communicate with service users and colleagues from non-binary or trans backgrounds. It could also be somewhere that something that our working group on equality, diversity and inclusion talk about as well. And we'll be receiving recommendations from both those groups. And also, I will like to mention as well that those working groups, we're very happy to receive volunteers to be part of those working groups. So if you are if you're a person of colour, if you have a neurodivergence, if you have a disability, if you feel that you would fit within one of those working groups, where we'll be discussing the standards before their final publication, then please do get in touch with me. My email is coming up on a slide when I let Maheshi take the reins again and return back to her slide. So yeah, this is so great to have so many different responses and really important topics being brought up as well in the Slido. If you haven't had a look yet, I really do encourage you to go onto the Slido, have a look, and to put your thoughts in there. And it's also great to hear some of the good things about what people have seen in these proposed standards and the guidance as well. So we've got someone saying here that it's good to see separation of social media in the standard, as it could be ambiguously interpreted in the current standards. And again, that is the feedback we received in the pre-consultation period. So that is definitely something that we were specifically addressing in the way in which we've drafted the proposed standards now. Oh, and this is a great post as well. That's just in general ways to think about making sure that we all communicate in a good way. My organisation posts a code of conduct that people have to sign up to before being let into online meetings. Very interesting, and they say it's a great reminder about expectations. So that's something to think about there as well, in the different processes that we can think about sort of suggesting and to help us to communicate better with our colleagues, for example.
And in the chat box as well, just on Teams, because I know some people can't access Slido too, there's a bits about kind of 2.9 under the social media and networking sites. What would kind of it advises that you must take reasonable checks to ensure information is correct. So someone's asked what would be considered reasonable, and just I think another great question to put in the consultation responses, bits around fact checking and checking in.
For sure, yeah. Thank you so much for alerting me to that comment, Maheshi, as well. I just want to add on to that in our guidance on social media, we do go into a little bit more detail about what reasonable checks would be. So there we talk about making sure that the source of the information that you're sharing, if for example you're sharing secondary information, you're thinking about the origin of that information and how trustworthy that source is. So that's one of the ways in which you can make reasonable checks as well. And I think where one is making where one is posting information about health, for example, think about the evidence that is that you've looked at that's made you think in that way, and also you can think about the other standards as well, and how they interact with sort of the way in which we communicate. So, for example, our previous workshop, which if you missed, you can look at the recording online, by the way. It should be posted online by the end of this week. And yeah, we talked about equality, diversity and inclusion in that previous session. And there we talked about that the new proposed standards are requiring registrants to actively think about the biases and the values and the beliefs that we hold and how that translates into the things that we say to people, the ways in which we treat people, and think about the impact of that. And I think that goes alongside that when you're thinking about posting on social media and and thinking about the reasonable checks that you can make to ensure that the information that you're posting isn't just coming from a value, it's also coming from a value that's evidenced, and that you can say is accurate and true to your knowledge.
Yeah, we've had another comment as well. Someone's put, we work with people who are often stressed, so communication is particularly difficult in these circumstances. So restoring situations where there has been a rupture is vital. And some more comments on civility as well, and how some organisations use that. One comment says, we've used civility statements read aloud by chairs at reviews of cases and reviews of incidents.
Awesome, really great comments. Thank you, everybody, so much for participating and engaging with us today. We really appreciate it. And yeah, as I say, please do go out and respond to our consultation. Maheshi, I'm going to give back to you and your slides now as we bring the session to a close.
Great, thanks, Rosemary. So that lends us on to the My HCPC Standards event. So I'd like to draw your attention to some of the sessions that we're running in relation to our recent updates to the standards of proficiency. So these include a webinar on equality, diversity and inclusion on the 23rd of May, a session on leadership on the 7th of June, and a session on digital skills and new technologies on the 19th of June. So you can sign up to any of these My HCPC Standards webinars on our website, and I'll just paste the link into the chat, but it is www.hcpc-uk.org/My HCPC standards. And if you want to email us directly, you have Rosemary's direct email at the top there. We also have the policy department email address on the bottom right hand side, as well as the professional liaison service, the registration department, and fitness to practice. You also have our social media tags as well, so feel free to follow us and get in touch with us that way. And I think that brings the session to a close. So thank you everyone for taking your time out of your day and joining us. So please do get in touch on the links, and if you have any further information or if you've got any questions about the standards of conduct, performance and ethics consultation and review, please do get in touch once again. And thank you for participating and listening today. Goodbye from us.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everyone.